Kính chào quý vị, chào mừng quý vị trở lại với chương trình VOR On Air do Vietnamese American Roundtable thực hiện. Kính thưa quý vị, ngày hôm nay là tháng 5 rồi thưa quý vị, là tháng 5 là cái tháng mà gọi là cái tháng chúng ta tôn vinh những người châu Á, những người Việt, người Việt, người Á Đông là những người mà đã và đang làm việc để phục vụ cho cộng đồng. Thì trong cái tháng 5 này thì Nguyên rất là hân hạnh khi mời được Daniel và Kevin là hai người đang làm việc cho giám sát viên quận 3 của quận Santa Clara, tức là giám sát viên Otto Lee. Và hơn thế nữa, Nguyên còn mời được Peter và Jay là hai người nhân viên thực tập viên của tổ chức Vietnamese American Roundtable. Ngày hôm nay thưa quý vị, cái buổi nói chuyện của chúng tôi sẽ là thành tiếng Anh, sẽ không có thông dịch thành tiếng Việt, nhưng mà chúng tôi rất là mong là cái buổi nói chuyện này sẽ mang lại những cái nguồn động lực, những cái nguồn cảm hứng cho các bạn trẻ để mà các bạn có thể tham gia vào những cái công cuộc phục vụ cho cộng đồng. À, chúng ta có thể nghe qua những cái lời mà Daniel và Kevin nói là những người mà đã và đang phục vụ cho cộng đồng tại quận Santa Clara, và Peter và Jay là hai người nhân viên thực tập mới toàn của Vietnamese American Roundtable. Hai em đã và đang làm việc rất là cực lực để mà cho chúng tôi có cái buổi game ngày hôm nay. So I'll switch back to English now. Peter and Jay, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the introduction, Nguyen. Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Vu, and I am one of VAR's 2024 interns. And the purpose of this VAR on Air today is to highlight the amazing work that Daniel and Kevin do at the District 3 office as AAPI individuals, as well as highlight how their Asian identity has shaped their perspective in policymaking and public service. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jay.
Thank you, Peter. So my name is Jay, and I am also a new VAR 2024 intern, and I'm hosting the segment alongside Peter and Nguyen. So if I could have Kevin and Daniel introduce themselves, and then we'll kick this off.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Cow, and I'm a policy aide for Santa Clara County Supervisor Otto Lee, covering healthcare, social services, and education.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lee, and I'm also a policy aide for Supervisor Lee. And my issue areas cover housing, homelessness, the immigrant communities, and also animal control and regional bodies like MTC and ABAG.
Thank you, Kevin and Daniel, for introducing yourselves. I'll kick us off with our first question now. What has been one of the most meaningful projects you have been a part of as a D3 member, and why was this so significant to you?
Yeah, first, I would like to thank the Vietnamese American Roundtable for having us here today. One of the most meaningful projects that I've been a part of on this District 3 team is declaring mental health and substance abuse as a public health crisis on January 11th, 2022. I helped develop this piece of legislation in which the county we call a referral to advance comprehensive and coordinated emergency response to the mental health and substance use treatment needs of county residents and develop short-term and long-term strategies to address the behavioral health workforce shortage. Before working for Supervisor Lee, I used to work at the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Services Department for a couple years, working on two programs for children and young adults. During that time, I learned to really appreciate the importance of addressing our mental health needs. And fast forward, once I started working for the supervisor and this opportunity fell on my lap to work with Supervisor Ellenberg's office, I said, well, it's time to go. This is important. This is something that the community desperately needs. And just to kind of set the table here, January 2022, we were all still in the thick of COVID and lots of isolation, lots of mental health need. And I was really happy to be a part of this movement to add more funding, more staffing, enhance programs, and open new lines of services for mental health and substance use with the support of Supervisor Lee and the entire board. And this has been a really important project to not only Supervisor Lee, but myself included.
All right. Thank you for that eloquent answer, Daniel. I think you're going to make me kind of look like a fool of it here because I'm just kind of speak from the heart and just freeball this really. So you asked, what's one of the most meaningful projects I've been a part of, and why was it so significant to me? So like Daniel, I'm gonna kind of share with you guys about a referral that I worked on, which, like Daniel had mentioned earlier, is the county's terms for a legislative piece of action, right? But before I kind of do that, let me just kind of do some ground setting and give you all kind of the context here. So about a year to a year and a half ago, um, our office started hosting meetings in collaboration with City Council member David Cohen's office. And so in these collaborative meetings, we basically invited stakeholders from pretty much all over the county, our local jurisdictional partners like Valley Water, and then we basically invite a bunch of city departments and county departments over. And basically, the idea around why we have these meetings is because we want to be able to ensure that these folks are all kind of coming together to talk about issues that they're kind of seeing and figure out ways in which they can work together collaboratively, right? And specifically as it relates to our jurisdictional area. So you know, in one of these meetings, a representative from our county's backpack homeless healthcare program happened to attend. And the BHHP team is awesome. Basically, what they do is they go out in the streets and they look for people who are unhoused, and they basically check in on them and to say, "Hey, do you need any like medical healthcare services? Do you need some medication? Do you have a cut?" Right? So they're really doing some incredible work here. And one of the nurses that were in attendance that day in that meeting kind of pointed out to us that, hey, one of the biggest barriers that they kind of face is that we have a segment of the unhoused population who actually are refusing services because they don't want to leave their support animals alone. And when I first heard that, I was like, huh, that's really interesting because I feel like generally when we think about how we help serve the unhoused, right? It's usually about do they have a place to live? Can we get them some food? Just like basic needs, right? But it actually turns out that with a lot of these nurses, what they've shared with us was they'll often prioritize the health of their like dog or cat over their own health needs, right? So maybe they need to go into the hospital to receive services, but they don't want to leave their animal, just kind of left alone. And as a result of that, they jeopardize their health as a result. So when I heard about that, I thought, wow, you know what? There could be an opportunity to like really look into this a little bit. And so I did a little bit of research, and I also met with like a bunch of folks who have experience in providing like veterinary care and things to that effect. So, for example, I went to like local community colleges, spoke with like some people who really have engaged in this work. And, after going through these meetings, we basically came on a referral that had like three separate items. And one of them was, hey, basically work with local veterinary colleges or colleges that offer veterinary program and see if there's a way we can like kind of get their interns involved in helping in some way, right? Creating like a pipeline. The second thing was, hey, let's see if there are opportunities to also partner up with like nonprofit organizations that already do this kind of work and seeing if there's a way we can, expand this partnership with the county. And then the last thing was seeing if we can get the backpack homeless healthcare program to work with these veterinary services and figuring out if there's a way that they can potentially work together when it comes to triaging and helping these people. And so really I found this significant because as I kind of alluded to earlier, This tries to address the needs of an underserved community in a critical way that I feel like would often go under the radar unless you speak to like an unhoused person, right? So in a way, it's like trying to address the problem through the lens of a segment of the unhoused population. So that's something that I found really significant and meaningful to me.
Thank you for giving us insight into your work in the District 3 office. Like for Kevin, I think it's really interesting to hear about the other facets of issues that unhoused individuals face. That's not really something that I feel like a lot of people take into account. At least for me, I never really thought about how unhoused individuals might struggle with transitioning to different areas, especially when they have a pet or the issues that their pets might face. And for Daniel, it was really great to hear about your work, particularly within mental health and education, as someone who is a high school student and struggled with mental health a lot during COVID-19. It was really great to hear you be a part of an initiative that I'm sure impacted me indirectly, and I'm sure many other students in the area. So, in addition to spotlighting your work, we're also curious as to how your experiences as an Asian have shaped your perspective and service, which leads me to my next question. How has your heritage and/or cultural experiences affected your career in the public work sector?
Yeah, so my Vietnamese heritage and cultural experiences have affected my work in the public sector in many ways, but there are two things that I want to highlight: understanding and pride. In my work at the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Services Department and my work here with Supervisor Lee, the understanding and life experiences that I bring to the table, I know are valuable to my teams. And here are a couple examples. So, one, I speak Vietnamese, and that allows me to converse with Vietnamese community members, elderly folks who don't speak much English. When I take a constituent call and they speak broken English and it sounds like that person may know how to speak Vietnamese, then I instantly transition to speaking Vietnamese. Or if it's another staff member who says, hey, we have a Vietnamese constituent on the line, is Danielle available? That is helpful to not only our team, but in terms of gaining trust with constituents, learning what their issues are, understanding their concerns, and taking their feedback into consideration for improvements to our team, improvements to county policies, add funding to programs. Having that language access is really important to Supervisor Lee and our team. And when it comes to working on county policies and programs, I make an effort to think about outreach in multiple languages, but in particular Vietnamese. For instance, if we want to get the word out about something to the Vietnamese community, well, we better get on the radio. We better talk to our faith-based groups, our Catholic groups, our Buddhist groups, and other groups. And there are key community members, there are key organizations like yourselves at VAR who do a fantastic job at broadcasting information that the county needs to share with the community at large. And we rely on folks like you in the community to share this with everybody else. And in addition to understanding, there's a strong component of pride. I'm proud to be Vietnamese. I am proud to be Vietnamese as an employee for the County of Santa Clara and with Supervisor Lee. And I was the writer of Supervisor Lee's referral presented at the February 6th Board of Supervisors meeting, reaffirming the flag of the former Republic of Vietnam, cờ vàng ba sọc đỏ, as the official flag of the Vietnamese American community in Santa Clara County, and opposed the display of the flag of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam on county-owned flagpoles. And I have to tell you, in my 3 years working for Supervisor Lee, in terms of where my Vietnamese heritage really, really came into play, I felt like writing this referral, this reaffirmation meant a lot to me. As a matter of fact, I have chills down my spine right now as I say this, because when I talk to my parents, when I talk to my aunts and uncles, they feel strongly about cờ vàng ba sọc đỏ, and communism is what caused them to flee Vietnam. And so to be here in the United States in 2024 in Santa Clara County writing this piece of legislation to reaffirm cờ vàng ba sọc đỏ means the world to me.
Yeah, no, my God, you were just killing it with the answers. So polished there. I just hats off. It's gonna be hard to follow that up. I'm gonna try. So, how's my heritage and their cultural experiences affected my career in the public sector? I think I'm gonna start here. So, I am actually an immigrant to this country. I came to California, Southern California, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And, growing up in the States as an immigrant, I'm sure maybe some of you all can relate to this, but, my parents don't speak fluent English. And so growing up, like if we had bills to pay, I, by default, along with my sisters, had to be like the translator for our parents, right? So just having to navigate like two worlds, right? One at home where you're speaking the language from your home country versus, in America, which I also now consider my home country. And so I think that when you kind of go through this cultural experience of having to navigate between two different cultural experiences, you just kind of realize like, hey, this is something that I think makes me unique in my sense of identity. And I think how that all kind of translates though doesn't really reflect until like way later on in my life. Um, so when I was studying at Cal, um, up until that point in my life, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do as far as, which sector I wanted to work in, right? Um, in fact, to be completely blunt with you all, like public work sector, working in the public sector was not even something that I had even crossed my mind because up until that point, I had worked an internship doing like marketing communications for a private company, or I remember helping out with some research at an academic institution, right? But um, through a stroke of luck, I had the chance to study abroad, despite the fact that I have some complicated legal issues here in this country. Um, but the long story short of it was I got to leave the country to do a study abroad semester in England. And this was right around the time of the 2016 presidential election. So I was there in the UK from about September 2016 through January 2017. And the day before the presidential election, it was really interesting because we had students that came from all over the world and they didn't have enough student housing. So they actually placed us all in hotels, right? And so it was great that you got to interact and meet with people from all over the world. But the day before the US presidential election, they all huddled on around the common room. And I remember just kind of like walking in and going like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, you guys watching an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians or something? But no, needless to say, they were all paying attention to the presidential election. And I think at that time, I was just someone who was not really politically in tune. I wasn't really someone who I consider political at all. And I thought, hey, you know what? Hillary Clinton has this. I'm going to go to bed early. So I said, good night, peace. Next thing you know, I wake up the next morning and check like Reddit or whatever and see that the unthinkable to this Californian has happened. And I remember walking down to the common room, making my way to the kitchen. And, generally this space would be full of life, laughter. But on that day, it was eerily quiet. And then I recall bumping into someone who I also know was from the States, but I don't recall which state he was from, but what I could tell was that his eyes were pink from crying all night. And so when we locked eyes in that moment, no words needed to be said. And I think, we just came for a hug. And I'm not going to lie to you guys and said, and that's when I knew I wanted to get into public service. But I do think that that was a poignant moment in my life where I think at least the seed was implanted to say, hey, you know what? Uh, Elections matter. And maybe, my work could be helping people through politics. And so, all that to say, if it wasn't for my heritage and my experiences as an immigrant to this country, I don't think I'd be here.
Yeah. Thank you for those great responses. I just want to draw back on Daniel's second response. And like I understand like personally how like speaking Vietnamese can play such a huge role when when it comes to helping like marginalized communities. Like personally, I volunteer at the hospital, and like in the past, though speaking and translating may seem like a small action, I've seen like how personally it can create like such a huge difference for others when navigating a system that they're unfamiliar with. And in this case, like the American healthcare system for me, or like for you, the policy and public service system. And I also want to draw back on Kevin's first response about homelessness and how you tried to help both homeless as well as their service animals because you saw how much they cared for those service animals. I do this thing like tri-weekly, but I've slowed it down now where on the weekends I'll set up a stand and then I will cut hair for those that are homeless as well as like fellow students at my high school that are under-resourced. And when it comes to the homeless, like I my favorite interactions are those with like service animals because I see like how much they genuinely care for them and how like the service animal is basically like another limb to them and like they fall on it for like emotional support and like just and yeah, it's just so important to them. Yeah, so I just wanted to go back on those. So thank you for those responses. And so for my next question, I have one specifically for Daniel. And don't worry, Kevin, we have one for you also later on. So Daniel, we did a little research on you, and we found that in the past you've worked for sports teams. So I had a question regarding that. So having worked behind the scenes with professional sports franchises, what insights did you gain about leadership, teamwork, and strategy that you feel have translated to your work in the civic slash political arena?
Appreciate the question, and you definitely did your homework there. So there are many similarities between the worlds of professional sports and government and politics. As a matter of fact, many of the things that I learned about the areas you mentioned, leadership, teamwork, and strategy, are nearly identical in both arenas. Prior to working at Santa Clara County, I worked for 3 years with the California Golden Bears football team. Go Bears. As a student videographer, student equipment manager, and a student assistant on the defensive coaching staff from 2013 to 2016. And I was an equipment intern for the San Francisco 49ers for the 2016 season. There aren't many Asians, especially Vietnamese people, in the world of football at the collegiate level, at the professional level. But I learned that the color of my skin and how I look don't have any bearing on my ability to work hard, provide leadership, be a team player, or provide support for game strategy. The same can be said about government and politics. And here are some of my observations transitioning from the world of football to the world of government and politics. In county politics, there are 5 county supervisors, and each supervisor has their own team, like their own little football team. Our board chambers at 70 West Heading downstairs on the first floor. That's where board meetings are held. And to me, that's like a football field. The lights are bright, the mics are on. There's a lot of strategy involved where supervisors discuss community needs, funding, and staffing, and they go back and forth. Sometimes they attack each other. Sometimes supervisors go on the defense. And for all the X's and O's that we discuss, like Kevin and I, to prepare the supervisor for these board meetings, for discussion on these items, that is the same thing like coaches sitting back, getting ready to play, the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, hey, time to buckle down. What do we need to do? Just like my time with the Cal Bears. Hey, we're playing Stanford. Let's buckle down. What do we got to do? And the staff work long hours to support their supervisor. And in our case, we work long hours to support Supervisor Lee. And the same can be said about the football world. Coaches work tirelessly and very long hours to support their players, to position the players best on the field in certain situations to be successful and ultimately win. And to kind of tie this all together, although the board chambers in 70 West Heading is like a football field to me, big picture, we're all playing on the same team. We're all trying to improve county services. We're all trying to find ways to become more efficient. We are all trying to find ways to be more useful in our resources, in our information sharing, in the products we provide. And so to me, it's interesting because in football, we fight against each other. May the best team win. And in politics, at times it feels like may the best supervisorial team win. But at the end of the day, nah, that's not the goal. The goal is to move all of us as a county of almost 2 million residents forward in a better direction. And it is a humongous effort, and all 5 supervisors play a role. And folks like Kevin and I are there behind Supervisor Lee going, hey, you should go that way, or maybe think about going the other way. And that's really what it is.
Yeah, thank you for that, Daniel. You really know how to draw the parallelisms between football and the chambers of policy really well. So, like I said earlier, I have another question that's tailored just for Kevin, actually, this time. So, for Kevin, we've seen that in the past you've had experience working with the Office of Immigrant Relations and on research projects examining how AAPI immigrant populations interact with healthcare systems. And this provides a unique vantage point for us, actually. So, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest systemic barriers and challenges facing AAPI immigrants in accessing essential services like healthcare, housing assistance, and other social safety nets? And how have those firsthand insights shaped your approach to develop policies and programs to better meet the needs of AAPI immigrant families in our region?
Yeah, so before I respond, I think I just want to caveat my experiences there to say, like, I was only really working for the Office of Immigrant Relations for a good 2 to 3 months. So please take that what you will. But having said that, I think some of the things that I kind of learned as far as what some of these biggest systemic barriers and challenges are concerned is, well, first, the AAPI community is not a monolith, right? So what that means is that the reasons for diaspora is complex, and some of that could range from what's going on in the home country, when you immigrated to the country, when your ancestors immigrated to the country. So I think it's important to make that distinction to say that there's no blanket approach when it comes to just this one thing that will make things better all of a sudden, because everyone's stories are different. But, you know, with that being said, if I had to kind of point something out, I would say that it's important to be able to think about the differences in the culture that we grew up here in America, which is more of like an individualistic culture, versus what a lot of these East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian countries live in, right? Which are collectivist cultures, right? So naturally, when you kind of have this divide, um, my understanding is that in individual cultures, like here in the States, we're often driven by what it is that I want, what the individual needs. Whereas collectivist cultures, you know, take actions and take the needs of the group at maybe the expense of their own self. So I think that that's some important ground to lay, because when we think about how these attitudes permeate when it comes to accessing essential services, right? This could, affect attitudes around how or why we would seek out these services, right? Sometimes it could be that folks have a sense of guilt, sense of shame and stigma around, accessing these services. So I kind of say all that to say, think that cultural competency is extremely important, and the lack of such would probably be, one of the biggest barriers. Um, and just having some awareness around that, I think, would go a long way. And now, to directly respond to your second question around how have these firsthand insights shaped my approach to developing policies and programs to better meet the needs of our AAPI communities. First off, I just want to say that developing policies and programs to fit these needs are often complex and multifactorial, because the county is essentially an administrator of state and federal funding, uh, but that the money that the county receives can only be spent under certain circumstances and for a specific purpose, right? So I say all that to say there's a lot of documentation and red tape that is involved in helping these communities. So what often ends up happening, and Daniel can probably speak to this as well, is that we lean on a lot of these culturally competent CBOs that directly work with our AAPI populations, right? And it's because they already have the programs and infrastructures built in, instead of the county needing to create one ourselves, right? And most importantly, I think that these CBOs, what they have in space that we may not always have, is the trust of the community. What I mean by that is, some immigrants don't know the difference. Hell, I think it goes even beyond immigrants, right? Some people just don't know the difference between local and federal government, and what those differences of functions are. So in fact, even depending on who's president, can sometimes aid or hinder, how our immigrant communities get served.
All right. Yeah, thank you for your responses thus far, Daniel and Kevin. They've been great. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I think I'll pass it on to Nguyen and Shay to close out this bar on air.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter and Jay, for hosting this meeting. This is great. Jay, do you have any final questions for Daniel and Kevin?
No, I just wanted to thank you guys for coming on here today, since I did think we'd run until 6:30, but it seems that it's 7 now. So thank you guys for spending your evening here. We really appreciate being able to hear about your experiences.
Yeah, that is.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
Yeah, this is great.
I guess the final questions that I may have for you, Daniel and Kevin, is that the audio segment is going to go out to the Vietnamese community, and the listeners, maybe the parents, younger adults, right, in high school and college, they are looking to do something for the community. They may want to consider public policy, maybe not, right? But what is the advice that you would give them, like younger adults, for your younger self, right? if you wanted to, quote unquote, help people, how do you get into this kind of work?
You want to take that first, sir?
Sure.
Okay.
First, I think it's really important to get a firm grasp of what you are interested in and what you think you're good at. Especially if you're in school, doesn't matter what grade you are in, doesn't matter if you're in college or not. It's important to understand what gets you interested, what makes you tick, what gets you going. And once you figure out the motivation behind you wanting to help people in whatever way, shape, or form that may look like, it's important to reach out to folks who work in government, county employees, city employees. It's important to do your due diligence and online research to inform yourselves on what each level of government does, because the city has a completely different set of responsibilities than the county, than the state, than the federal government. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think, oh, if I reach somebody in government, that I'll get the help I need. It's, for us, a lot of our job, a lot of our work in constituent support is simply redirecting people to the level of government, the jurisdiction, who has a say over the certain policy issue, the concerns that the constituent may have. Once you learn about all these spaces and you say, hey, I'm interested in the world of healthcare. What level of government deals with healthcare? Well, the county sure does. You are all more than welcome to reach out to individual board offices in Santa Clara County. I won't volunteer you, Kevin, but I'll say I'm more than happy to take calls, emails, just anyone who wants to learn more about my own experiences in public service. And I also taught at San Jose State for 4 years and love giving advice, and the whole mentorship thing is right up my alley. I think you need to do everything in your power to inform yourself and really understand what space you want to be in the world of helping people. And if government's right for you, then figure out where in government you want to see yourself in. I'll pass it to Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. So I actually have two pieces of advice here. The first one I think is really to be grounded in your expectations of why you get into this line of work, right? So passion and drive can really only get you so far, right? If that's what you're in it for, I'm going to kind of go against the grain and say that that all fades in time. So if you want to have a long career in a sector, it's my belief that a individual needs to practice detachment, which is not to say that you don't care about this line of work, but by detachment, what I mean is that when you are involved in a certain assignment, certainly give it your all, right? Do everything that needs to be done. And then when it's time to let it go, you let it go and you move on to the next task at hand. And the reason why I think this is so important is because when a person is suddenly becomes emotionally invested in a line of work or issue area, right? That can also sometimes cloud one's judgment when it comes to doing the work. And I speak from this from personal experience, right? I'm not immune to this. So this is just something that I've kind of noticed within myself, and I've been taking a lot of mindfulness to make sure that that's something that I stay diligent about. My second piece of advice here is don't underestimate the impact that one person can have, right? Which is that maybe some people get into this line of work or really just any action, but think that what's the point, right? It's easy to fall into futility to say my conversation with this constituent, with this friend, with this person is not going to matter in the grand scheme of things. But actually, you would be surprised, a single conversation, a single interaction, a single work assignment that you have has cascading effects. There don't never forget that there are always things at play based on your actions. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean that there aren't ripple effects.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin and Daniel. Jay and Peter, any final words before we end the recording?
No, I just want to say thank you again for everything.
Yeah, same here. Thank you guys.
Awesome.
Thank you all for your time. This was so great.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you all. This was very fun.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care now.